Good evening.
Okay.
We're the Class Advisory Committee meeting posted for Wednesday, October 19 via this Zoom call. First order of business is that we call the meeting to order with roll call. I believe Gina Stino said she would not be able to be here this evening.
That's correct.
And Mike Barclay.
Here.
Fran Collins. He was here. I saw him. Chris, Fran might need to be logging back in. You might want to keep an eye out for him. Patrick Kennedy.
Here.
Mark Maggi.
Here.
Ellen Marr.
Here.
Mary McGoldrick.
Here.
Meg Wheeler.
Here.
And Rob Hillman. I am here. So Chris had or Tracy had distributed a version of the current warrant. And I think our first and pretty much only substantive agenda item is discussion and review of the warrant articles. So I'm sure we'll screen share it, but hopefully you've got a chance to at least look at it. We did preview it at our last meeting. This one puts a little bit more substance on the document and gives us a few things that we can vote on. My conception is that we walk through the warrant article by article, discuss what we need to discuss, vote on what is ripe for voting, and to anything that's not, or that we believe we need more information, that we note that and take those matters up at a meeting a week from tonight. Does that work for everybody? Good. Hearing none. So the Article 1 we discussed a little bit at the last meeting, and this is the pro forma article that's required to transfer money from the cable television licensees in town, that is Comcast and Verizon. They pay money to the town under their licenses, and that supports the PEG access function. It's just pass-through money. It's all by contract. But it does require town meeting approval under some statutory changes 3 or 4 years ago. Does anybody have any questions for Chris about this this item? Okay. Where's Jean? Oh, I'm sorry, Ellen, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, I just have a stupid question. What does PEG stand for?
I'm glad you asked. In cable television, local cable television stations provide something called Public Educational and Governmental Access, PEG. And it's Cohasset 143 is what it is. But they're the 3 allowable functions of the channels that the cable companies provide to the town. And 143 is funded from a fee connected with the cable company's revenues.
Okay, thank you.
No trouble. Anybody else? Anything else? Okay. Where's Jean when we need her? She's become our go-to member for formulating motions. But we have sort of an incantation, Ellen, for your purposes. We usually, when we're doing warrants, develop a certain formula for the vote to make it easy for the minutes, that every vote has pretty much a standard text. And do I have it in front of me? No, I do not. But let me give it a try, and then people can correct me. Do we typically do it? Shall the advisory committee vote to recommend Article 1 in the form it appears in the warrant for approval by town meeting?
So I think we maybe say substantially in the form of the draft warrant that was circulated to us.
I think that's shall the advisory committee recommend to town meeting that it approve Article 1 in substantially the form or substantially the same form, Patrick?
How about substantially in the form of the draft warrant, dated today, October 19th? We got it today.
The draft warrant dated October 19. Ellen, do you want me to read that back?
No, I got it.
Excellent, thanks. So we'll try to make every motion pretty much track that, so it's nice and orderly. Sometimes it gets a little funky with the way the question gets formulated, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Does somebody want to make that motion?
So moved.
Patrick, second.
Second.
I heard Fran first. His yellow box came up. It's like playing Hollywood Squares. It's awesome. So we have a motion and a second. We vote by roll call. Mike Barclay,
Aye.
Fran Collins,
Aye.
Patrick Kennedy,
Oh, Patrick Kennedy says aye.
Mark Maggi,
Aye.
Ellen Mar,
Aye.
Mary McGoldrick,
Aye.
Meg Wheeler,
Aye.
and Rob Hillman. I too am an aye. So we have now recommended Article 1. Go team. Unpaid bills, previous fiscal years, Chris, the absence of numbers here does not mean that there are no unpaid bills. Is that correct?
That is correct. We're just in the process, we're still shaking out, again, with the transition between treasurer collectors and finance directors and actually some key people in other departments over the last 6 months. Some things slipped and some of them are actually fine. They just didn't get coded right. So we're in the process of closing a bunch of them out. So there will be unpaid bills. There'll be more than usual, but they won't. I think we'll have it at a comparatively manageable level. So that said, Jennifer's priority appropriately has been get the books closed and make sure everything's good, certified, get that free cash number, and then get everything up and running. So we are close, and you're going to have to see it. I'd like to have you see it next week if at all possible. So
That's
we can
fine.
get it approved.
Yeah, that's consistent with what you told us last week. Unless anybody has any other questions for Chris on this, we'll defer this one to our next meeting. Excellent. All right, the stabilization funds. Let's spend close to $1 million. Chris, you want to walk us through these?
Sure. So here's it up on the screen if you can all see it. So the first one is the commitment that's part of our annual obligation based on the OPEB funding policy that's been adopted all around. The number started at about 500,000 and it's been going up 3% a year. We break into two pieces. One is paid in the operating budget at annual town meeting for the coming year, and the other chunk is this 350 we've been taking out of free cash. So this will complete the payment this year, which is $540 something thousand, I believe. And so that's just, this is following the steps of the OPEB trust fund. The next one, again, our policies also dictate where free cash should go, and it's one-time items and stabilizations and OPEB as first priority. So you're going to see all three of them. So what this is money going into the capital stabilization. Actually, this covers all the projects you'll see in a few minutes, and an article, upcoming article, and put a little bit more in. And by the way, I'm sorry, let me preface this. Jennifer's estimating we have about 1.5 million plus in free cash. So I'm using the number 1.5. That's right in target with our policies. And so that's the first item up to capital. And then 100, the special ed stabilization was tapped earlier this year for $200,000. Even though schools turned back very, very little. I don't remember the exact number, but it was a 4-digit number this year. Usually it's 5 or 6. It's still good policy to continue to keep this funded. So the recommendation is to put 100,000 back into the special stabilization fund. We're still well below the max. So questions from me or Jennifer? You're muted, Mr. Chairman.
Mike. Sorry.
So Chris, I'm just so I guess I'm wondering, because you're saying that these transfers are to then cover items in Article 4,
Capital will be, yeah, some of them will cover that.
the capital. Okay, so what happens if we don't agree with the capital requests in 4? What happens?
It's okay. I mean, the money should go to capital stabilization anyway. We're running, we've had this conversation about needing to accelerate the amount of money going into capital. It's true. And so it's a down payment to that either way.
Okay.
Anybody else? Okay.
Move that we
Hearing
accept the article in the manner proposed.
Okay, we have a motion. Ellen, you can just put that ultimately in the same verbiage as we're using as our standards. We have a motion to approve or a motion to recommend approval. Mary McGoldrick is the second. We vote by roll call. Mike Barclay,
Aye.
Brad Collins,
Aye.
Patrick Kennedy,
Aye.
Mark Maggi,
Aye.
Ellen Mar,
Aye.
Mary McGoldrick,
Aye.
Meg Wheeler,
Aye.
and Rob Hillman is an aye. So we have approved Article 3. Article 4 is, Chris, do you want to talk about, you previewed some of these things, but we should talk them through again. And I know I've got questions about at least a couple.
So that, and they've changed a little bit. So
yeah,
it's with you as we move forward on these things. So what you have, so let me walk them through them. So the first one, we have a compost pile at the RTF. It grew substantially during COVID, during the pandemic. People aren't taking it anywhere near as fast as they're putting it in. And while Public Works would like to find a new home, the site that they are looking at, unfortunately, is going to require some permitting, we think. So in the interim, they need to get rid of this. So there's a company that will take it away and they will compost it further or do whatever they will. So it won't be our problem anymore. And our compost pile, the other problem with the compost pile, it doesn't compost well, right? It's not set up, anyone who does this at home, you kind of turn it over periodically and move it around. And we don't have enough room on the site to do it practically. We need a bigger area. So otherwise you don't get stuff fully composted. So we're going to keep taking, because it's better than having it scattered all over the town. And if people want to take it home, they still can. That said, this will clean it up and allow us to start a little fresher. So we might have come to you for a reserve fund transfer if it came down to this, because this is going to become an impediment to the operation of the transfer station if we don't do something fairly soon. Questions about the compost pile?
is there not room within the DPW's budget for that?
No, it's a one-time fairly good sized cost. It's only, it's still early in the year. We haven't gone through winter yet or anything else. And no, the short answer is none of this.
Okay.
It was like $5,000. I could have done it, but 30. CRM. Okay. Is there anything else on the compost pile? Like I know Brian. I mean, if you want something from Brian, I can get it for you.
No.
Okay.
Short answers deserve short answers. No, thank you.
CRM, the customer relationship management platform. We had used a product called C-Click Fix for a while. It's not hasn't really served our purposes. And as part of the refresh of the website and this whole new communications endeavor that we have embarked on, the select board has asked for us to look at a little more robust product. I used a very robust product in New York, where I was before. That said, it was a much bigger town with a call center and everything else, and those products are lots of money. We actually have one that's on the state contract. It's called, I think the underlying product is called GoGov, and they have many platforms, and this is one of them. They also have a reverse 911 system that we're looking at too. And we got to have more public presentation between now and town meeting, but it's only $700 this one year, and we'll build it into the budget in future years. It'll be into the IT budget hopefully everybody will like it. What it's going to do, it's going to allow us to track and report citizen requests and issues in a way that we can't now in a standardized way. So we'll have a better idea of who's calling, are people calling about potholes on Highland Ave or Forest Ave, or what are the highest questions that are coming in. It's going to allow us to do both work order systems, so we can track. Someone will call, it'll go. There'll be an email chain. Actually, in this case, hopefully someone will use the app, right? They'll use the app. It'll go to someone. We'll track it when who's got it. We'll know when it got done, and the constituent will get a nice email back saying, "Thank you for your inquiry, and here's what's going on." The goal is to roll it out in early 23, and we have to get some department head further buy-in. So, questions for me on this?
Chris, I have a question back on the compost pile. We're gonna pay somebody $30,000 to haul off compost that's about 80% composted already, and for them to recompost it and sell it at a profit to somebody. Did we get any other bids on that? That seems like we're,
The problem is, as I understand it, Fran, is that the market's flooded with this stuff. I mean, it's just everywhere. And I talked about places we could spread it, right? I mean, the problem is it's not, when you do a real good job of composting, it bakes out the weed seeds and everything else.
yeah, it kills everything, right?
Right. But we're not doing a really good job. The pile's not designed, the system it's not set up in a way to really compost effectively. So unfortunately.
Nor does the town, and this is through no fault of anybody's, do a really good job of policing what's thrown in that pile. If you ever taken dirt out of there, you get your share of plastic and nails and wood. This isn't just, it needs a little bit more time to bake. We compost here at home, and I do contribute to the pile there, but it's pretty rough. It's a place where people just dump all kinds of, what.
No, you're right. You're right, Mark, about that. That is true. And it needs to be turned over regularly. I mean, I've been to compost facilities and I know how they work at Windrose. But I'm just wondering if there's if the fact of the matter is that it's everywhere, then we have to pay to get rid of it, then so be it. But I'm just curious as to, were there any other bids of who people would want it? Apparently not.
Public Works did look through that, and I can talk to Michelle again. And again, if we can get it done for less, Fran, we will. This is a top cost, not a minimum cost. So, and again, Mark's point is also well taken. There's screening and stuff in there too, and we just don't have the ability to get that all done. That said, we have to set up a proper composting facility. We just do. I mean, we just don't have a lot of land, but we got to start. We got to start better than we are.
Thank you.
Mike, you had your hand up.
Yeah, the dollar amount's not a lot for this CRM, so I won't belabor this, but are we paying a licensing fee for 1 year? Does this system, in terms of what Ron's trying to do with the overall IT strategy, like, is this a system that's just we'll be able to layer it on top of the stack, and it's gonna be compatible with what we'll be needing, down the road once, Ron's able to, do what he needs to do to upgrade the overall IT infrastructure?
So the short answer is yes, it is inexpensive. Yes, it does meet our goals, and it's an annual license.
Okay, no, that's all you need to say.
Yep.
I'm good. Thanks.
And it does include training. So we may be the first Massachusetts client of this particular product, so we may get a little sweetener out of it, which is some extra months of service. We'll see.
Who's the vendor?
I think it's called GoGov, Mike. I have to go double check that.
Okay.
There's so many versions of these names, right? I believe it's called GoGov.
Okay.
And again, I had hoped to have it presented already to the select board, but there's been so many other things going around. We've got to wait till November. So I'll make sure we do it. We'll either come to advisory with a presentation as well, or you can watch what we do with the select board.
Anybody else? Okay, Chris, moving on.
So every few years there's a reval. This year's reval is very technical. There's some specialty work that Mary Quill needs, and because it's not a renewal thing, it's a one-time expense. This is just a bump. There was a little cross communication. We had hoped to take care of this back in the spring, and we didn't because there was some cross communication. She and Don didn't hook up quite exactly, and it didn't. quite make the budget like we had hoped, or an article in the spring. So she's reminded us she needs the money to get some of this work done. So this is just a one-time, some expenses for specialized work that they need to do to get it's really industrial and commercial, which is, again, there's some specialty services she needs, and that will do that. There's a variety of playgrounds at this. We have multiple playgrounds in town. This is really focusing on potentially all of them. Facilities got to take more of a robust role in maintaining them. There's some missing swings. There's some things that just need to get done. We're going to build this into the budget going forward annually. That said, this is just stuff that needs to get done so kids can play safely over the winter. There's a parallel work being done. I'm saying this only because you may have heard this on Beechwood, doing a bigger job on the Beechwood playground that's 27 years old. It really needs a refresh. That's going to CPC on Monday. So that's a different question. See your question, Mr. Chairman.
Chris, this is,
Ellen?
yep, I have a question. So these aren't really upgrades, it's really maintenance, isn't it? Because when you think of upgrades, you think of, improvements, better swings, better slides, safer facilities. I think
This is fixing. This is right. This is fixing and repairs. Now, specialty stuff that facilities doesn't only keep, right? They don't keep swing bases, and they don't keep that stuff. They're going to, as part of the kind of rework with rec, we're going to start doing this, and the budget that we'll present in the spring will have, like, if you remember a few years back, we started to build in maintenance of the rain gardens and the Veterans Memorials, which had never been done before. And so we got to start doing that now with facilities with these playgrounds. So, I mean, it's one of those things that nobody thinks about it until something breaks, right? And that we can't do it that way. It's not okay.
And how does this relate to the conversation at the select board meeting last night about upgrades?
Well, that was much of that was about Beechwood itself. This is money to put into facilities now so they can do some of this just plug-in repair work. There's a bigger question about rehabbing. There's some safety issues which are different. That involves like the rubber matting and stuff like that are going to be addressed, I hope, through CPC. They don't usually fund maintenance, right? CPC. So this is more maintenance stuff. The stuff that will go to CPC is safety, and it's also upgrades. There's a plan, again, I think it'll be presented Monday if any of you want to go to the CPC meeting virtually. It's a proposal to do 150,000 plus or minus a redo of the Beechwood playground. Again, it's 27 years old. It needs to be freshened and just brought up to standards for today.
Thank you.
I will.
Other questions on that item? Seeing none.
The next two are also facilities that are facility/rec. First is we need to crack seals tennis courts. If anyone saw the meeting last night, the select board is looking and working with boards and committees across the way, and it'll come to advisory at some point this fall and winter to do a little more, to take a look at to take the next step in the field and court study and take a hard look at a big project. That said, in the interim, we need to get the tennis courts functional because they're used by the high school sports most necessarily. And we're looking at for $10,000 to crack seal them so they can continue to be played on until the decision's made on the big plan. And then $5,000 is for a field rake. Again, it's because what we don't own. It allows for the baseball diamonds to be raked and the infields. We'll own it, we'll maintain it, and it's going to save us from having to scramble every time the seasons begin so that we can maintain it. We actually have tractors and things not tractors, the little machines that pull them. I'm blanking on the name, I'm sorry. So that's that. The $3,600, which is next. So later in the warrant, we're going to talk.
Well,
I'm sorry.
can I just ask one question about, because this field study is going to come up a few lines down.
Yep.
And it looks like it's going to be a recurring theme for
Yes.
this and several upcoming town meetings. And I recall that, a field study was commissioned, a field study was delivered. The select board put it on an agenda one night saying that with a vote, but that apparently wasn't like misunderstood to be much farther along than perhaps it was. But aren't there other boards like the Recreation Commission who have some input into this whole process before we spend $5 million on courts and fields and?
Yeah, so if you want me to jump ahead to that, so.
No, I let me just like pin it as a question. Let's get to it in due course.
Yeah.
I don't want to sidetrack this.
No, it's a good question, and it deserves a more thorough answer. And again, there will be a presentation. There'll be presentations publicly in November for the public and in December, and as we providing the conversations continue. By the way, REC has been, Michelle and I were at REC this week already talking about this. So the reason this is in front of all of you now is because REC said yes. They didn't vote because they didn't have all the members, but they're on board with the concepts. So we're moving this forward to allow a public conversation to catch special in December so that work can be done. If everyone's agreed, work will be done, plans will be done, bids will be done, and then we'll go to the annual in the spring and say, do you want to fund this? Are you prepared to fund this?
This has every earmark of what we talked about in the financial forum of a project that, like Frankenstein's monster, has been cranked up out of the ceiling, struck by lightning, and now has life of its own. We'll see.
I'm not going to say anything about that.
It's not, and I would be unfair of me to ask you to. It's not, that wasn't directed to you. That was directed to the universe. All right, carry on. I don't want to.
No, it's okay. So the $3,600, we have some wetlands work that needs to be done as part of the Wheelwright potential cell tower. So since we're, it's not money that was planned for. It's not a lot of money, but if we can fund it, it'll just make the DPW budget stretch further. And it's around a 10 meeting that we'll ask for it. So the next one I'm gonna ask if you want to, if advisory would be interested in doing an executive session, so I can brief all of you on the contracts that are. We have 6 of this and pretty much done. We need, well, some money's in the budget. The fire contract, for example, covers an extra year, and so we can talk more about that in executive session. So this would help fund this year and perhaps even into next some of the settlements that we're reaching.
Just to respond to that real quick, Chris, I think probably putting an executive session on our agenda for the next meeting is prudent. And that's a lot of contracts and there's some pretty big changes in them. So unless, well, we'll talk about it, but I think we'll skip over it for now. And
it's my recommendation. I'll jump to the last one because it's simple and then we'll go back to the field study. So if anyone has used these, so we have, this is one option, right? This is easy to go on Zoom. To do a hybrid meeting, we have something called we have a bigger system. If anyone came to or watched or participated in the zoning public meeting on Monday, we have this Polygon, which is good for big public meetings. And we have these things called owls. They're called owls. They kind of look like an owl. Apparently they hoot when they turn on. I haven't seen that happen. And they have a little dome on top. And again, the thing is only a couple of feet tall. And the cameras kind of zoom in on who's speaking. So for smaller meetings, like if this was happening in person, you could do an owl on the table and it would sort of spin around. Well, it doesn't literally spin. The camera kind of moves around, and they're very effective for smaller meetings that you're trying to hybridize. Select Board's going to try that out on Tuesday. So they're about $1,300, $1,200 each. So this would buy 3 more of them. We have 2 as hybrid meetings, and as this world continues. And some meetings end up in hybrid form, and as they will, not all of them, hopefully. These will allow us to be more flexible and add more spaces, so you can have more of those at the same time that you can tonight. The big number, the new big number. Anything about the owl? If you haven't seen the owl, it is kind of the Elder Affairs uses it regularly for their meetings, and Library's been using it. So the field study. So. There's been a public conversation about fields and courts now for more than a year, and There was money funded at a town meeting a year ago, and a study was done, and we've come a long way. We started with a big conversation about tennis actually before the pandemic, and that morphed into baseball fields and then the big conversation. So there's been multiple public meetings and multiple conversations about what to do. And obviously in government, there's a long pathway to get anything produced and done. And so this fall, the select board was like, go see if there's something that people can get their arms around, and we'll see if we can move forward with something. So starting with rec and open space, by the way, open space looked at this too. But rec has been the primary part on this. So the formal meeting this week to say, hey, this proposal to upgrade Milliken Field, to take that complex, which is controlled by the town, not the schools, add a third full-size regulation field for lacrosse and other field sports, and increase the number of tennis courts from 5 to 8. So you'd have the ability to do competitions and events with 8 courts, and then add 4 pickleball courts, and then add 65 parking spaces in the back behind the baseball diamond, not kind of tucked away in the back, and then potentially add some walking trails for folks, and finally finish that the building for storage and concessions and bathrooms. Activitas did an analysis of it. Those were presented to the select board last night as well, and they're floating out this concept of, hey, if we want to be able to have a conversation about this, we need to get these to engineered plans, right? So it would cost, according to a number we were given from our contractor, engineering consultants, Park Engineering Consultants, 322 would get this whole package together and bid. So that in the spring, there could be a public conversation about funding it. Obviously, before you spend 322, there has to be a public conversation about do you want it. So that said, if it doesn't happen now, you couldn't have that public conversation in the spring. And even potentially put it in front of the voters if you have bidded plans. So that's, you really should look at the whole proposal. And again, I can have that shared with all of you. I can have Michelle send the PowerPoint, and you can watch the select board meeting, that segment of it last night. Michelle did a good job of explaining it. And there's a lot of public conversation that has to take place over the next, before 10 meeting. If this is going to go forward. That said, there seems to be, from all the conversations that have been taking place, enthusiasm from the youth sports organizations, from the rec commission, and from other organizations that maybe it's the right time to do this and have this conversation. It's not turf, it's grass. Everything's still grass. And it addresses multiple needs. When the field study came out, the biggest need was these open recreational fields. It wasn't, not that there haven't been issues with baseball, but and softball. The biggest need are fields like these to do field hockey, soccer, lacrosse, and to add a third field would increase the capacity by a third. I mean, it's 2 fields there now. So that's what the numbers for. If you'd like more information, I most certainly can provide it. And I don't think this conversation is going to be done by November 1st, to be clear, when the warrant kind of closes. So it is possible that because this has come in comparatively late in the process, that there may be a decision, well, let's chew on this. So that is the moderately short answer.
Okay, there's a couple of questions out there. I just want to preface it by saying that this may be an article that for this evening's purposes, we decide to vote on certain aspects of it and defer on others, but we should still have the conversation. Mike, I see you, and then Patrick.
So I guess 3 points. The first is, given the dollar amount, and this is a big dollar amount for this field study, I'm a little surprised it's not a standalone article. Most of the time, every time I've ever seen any kind of field, school, or whatever study, it's a standalone article so that it gets the appropriate amount of discussion and / debate on the floor of town meeting. So that's the first thing. The second thing, I agree with your point, Rob, in that these are sort of self-fulfilling prophecies sometimes, where we spend $322,000 and then all of a sudden we get to the point where there's a huge cost and we say, but we've spent $322,000. We can't just flush that down the drain. So that worries me a little bit. And then lastly, against the backdrop of what I thought was an effort to assess the overall comprehensive needs of the town, to be sort of throwing in a multi-million-dollar field study, without looking at the other needs of the town, frankly. I'm not saying, look, my kids have all played sports, I've coached sports, I love sports, don't get me wrong. I don't know why a field rate costs $5,000, having been in baseball and softball for 20 years, but that's a different issue. I just think that given the size of this, I'm not sure why it's not a separate article and why it's not, because, what happens on the floor of town meeting, right? If this one gets sidetracked, I mean, the whole article could unless somebody introduces another motion on the floor of town meeting to separate out these different costs, I mean, this could torpedo everything. So for those reasons, I'm not convinced it should be put in this allocation of funds for one-time costs.
So on that particular process point, Mike, this has literally come together in this format in the last 48 hours, right? So one more appropriate place could be in the capital budget line, right? It could be there, and that conversation has not yet taken place.
Well, yeah, so I'm surprised that it hasn't taken place with the capital budget committee then.
Well, it's going to. I mean, so the select board had to authorize a conversation to take place. They did that just last night. So you're the first people to talk about it. That said, there's obviously a lot to talk about. I mean, you're absolutely correct on that. And where it should end up is a conversation that has not completed yet, right? That's even apart from whether it should be here or not, where it should be. Historically, we don't break out projects individually for votes, though they can be called for on the floor. That said, this may belong in capital, and that's still a conversation that we have.
So I think it does, and given that it's leading to a much bigger dollar amount that's going to have to be discussed, to me, it feels like it should be a separate article. So anyway, I'll step aside.
Patrick, then Mary.
I agree with Mike's points. I have a lot of questions about this particular line item at this point in time. Before I would ever authorize or vote to recommend authorizing this amount of money for follow-on field study, I would want to know what the neighbors around Milliken Field, how they feel about this size and scope of a project. 65 additional parking spaces down what is a cul-de-sac, to me sounds really problematic for those neighbors. I would want to know what permitting requirements there would be, wetlands, zoning. What are the permits that would be required in order to do all this work? Why would you spend the 322 unless you had all of those questions known and answered? Neighborhood support, minimal permitting issues. Those are two big ones I see. Probably a lot of others. That's what comes to mind.
Mary? Muted.
I would echo them both, and I know if I'm going to echo, I shouldn't raise my hand, but didn't know what they were going to say. And another number I would want to get a handle on is what the addition of this field and the other surrounding parking, the tennis, the pickle, the shed, et cetera, what that would do in terms of ongoing maintenance in the budget. I really believe that this is a tiny baby to bring out on the floor. It makes me a little nervous. I think it could kind of be a bit of a disaster.
Ellen?
I watched the presentation last night, and I do, Chris, I do have the PowerPoint from Michelle. I can send on to this group.
Thank you.
And the number of parking spaces, although it sounds impressive, if you're increasing the capacity of the fields by that much more, I'd be concerned that it's not enough. And the other comment I would have on the parking spaces is, I believe, and I could be wrong, but Bancroft Way is a dead end, right? And to park behind what is now the baseball field, if that's where you're thinking of carving out parking, I think it might be wetlands, but I'm not sure. I spoke with the resident on Bancroft Way today, and that person indicated that's wetlands behind there, but they weren't 100% positive. The other issue that was brought up last night, to Mike's point about, the wrapping our arms around all of the town's needs through the other committee is, the potential of getting MSBA approval next month for, what could be a new middle high school, what could be a renovated middle high school. And if it's a new building, I don't know if that can be thought about what they're going to do with close to 900 students if a new building is constructed on the existing parcel of the high school, and what happens to those fields or additional fields that might fill capacity, that's needed because, that's come out of the field study. So,
Okay.
so.
Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, no, sorry. So I agree with what everyone has said. I think there are still a lot of questions about it. Chris, you mentioned that it's, going to go in as a grass field. And in the presentation, it said, well, we could just lay turf on it, at a future point in time. Well, you can't just lay turf over grass. Mary's shaking her head. She knows as well as I do. It's a huge project. You can replace the turf, and that's essentially is replacing the carpet, which Alumni Field is going to happen. But to take existing grass fields and make them turf, it's not an easy. So I would be interested in looking at the incremental cost from the onset, if this were to go forward, of doing turf at the time of construction, as opposed to sometime down the road.
Mark.
I'm just gonna say that this feels like an issue that's reaching a breaking point in town at some point soon, as the town continues to expand, our youth sports continue to expand, population expands. Something needs to be done. I don't know if it's this, but it seems like there's been a lot of Band-Aids. We're resurfacing our track for the second time in 5 years, 6 years. Is that right? It feels like we never take the big step. And at some point, it gets more expensive to take lots of little steps than just to take a comprehensive look at things and do it right once and for all. And I just don't know how much longer we'll continue to kick the can down the road. And I also don't know how much longer that's fiscally responsible. Like I said, I'm nearly certain this is the second time in 5 or 6 years that we resurfaced our track. And you go to neighboring towns, you go down to Situate, you look at their athletic facilities and you think, what are we doing wrong with our asset that we don't have anything, a tenth as nice as what's going on here. So it's just the perspective of someone that maybe spends a lot more time at these facilities than people on the committee do.
Ellen.
Yeah, I just want to comment on the track. Mark, you're right. A few years back, we did put a Band-Aid approach on the track and just recover it so that it could be used safely. And then this year's project, which was actually approved almost 2 years ago, was a complete redoing of the track in terms of the drainage around the interior circumference of the track, because we had a lot of puddling when it would rain, some unevenness. And so, yes, there were 2 fixes, but the second fix was much more in depth. And the first one was just a quick fix so that it could be usable.
Yeah, just to follow up, what's happening at the field is a reconstruction. That track was ripped up and a new base was done. And there's a lot of work that's being done along my field to gain another decade plus, 10, 15 years. So, and but just on the question of turf, I think there's a lot of conversation in town and in the nation as a whole about what artificial turf should look like in the future. I think there's more and more concerns growing about the rubber. I mean, and some of the fill. There's different fill choices. Some communities are using alternatives that are more expensive, but are more environmentally friendly than the ground little rubber bits. So, you know, there are definitely, I feel like alumni turning it into turf was a home run for the community because it's used all the time and allowed for multiple games to be played on a regular basis. Milliken is not used to that level. I mean, it's used intensively, but it's much more seasonal. So I don't know. And again, that said, you know, if there's more programs going more often, you know, if you build it, they will come, right? So I will carry all these questions back, and I appreciate all the input on this.
Well, I think, is there any more questions about the field study issue? Mary, did I see your hand?
Yeah, just a real quick question, Chris, and this was something Rob alluded to earlier. So does this project potentially live with the Board of Selectmen? So they've authorized what, the rec department to go forward, or what?
So nobody's authorized anybody to go forward except to have a conversation. All they
Okay.
did last night was say, there's been a goal to get the field study down to as Mark was talking about, something that can be acted on, right?
Sure.
And there were three primary options. One is a brand new, buying a separate piece of land that would cost $15 to $20 million. The project could be upwards of $20 million with the acquisition of the property and the work that needs to be done on the site. Then there's land at the school. There's a lot of land at the school. The challenge with the school is that they're going through this big study, as Ellen was pointing out, and it's just not the right time for them to, you know, they're not going to entertain new fields when they don't know where the buildings are going to go and what's going to be done. So that's a couple of years down the road at best. And though I would expect that outside facilities will be included when they finally get to the concept of what they're going to end up doing. And we'll hear about the MSBA, at least the first stage of it, hopefully in December. So this particular project, the rebuilding of Milliken, was the one that seemed the most doable, right? Its price tag wasn't excruciatingly high. It could be funded through CPC, at least in part. And there's been ongoing conversations about how to fund it and maintain it going forward using the rec department's having, you know, setting aside money and really changing how the town maintains facilities. Hiring someone who's a dedicated professional for fields, who they can manage our facilities crews and others to make sure we're doing the right things all the time, and making sure that we maintain the tennis courts and all that in a better way than it's historically been. And the town has never really done that. I mean, you know, they've built facilities really well and then kind of let them go and they kind of wear down. And,
So just because we don't have to belabor this, because I think
No.
this would be a bigger conversation going forward, but the Cohasset Sports Partnership is still alive and well, although a little dormant at the moment. And I would hope that whomever is kind of spearheading this project or in charge of managing that project gives some thought to re-energizing that group, because they certainly came forward with the turf field project.
you know, if you want, I would appreciate, Mary, if you had a few minutes to circle back with Michelle and I, just to talk about that aspect of it, and so we can maybe plug some other citizens in and bring that, because this is really a community conversation that's starting. It's just, and again, I fully appreciate how it appears to be dropped on you tonight, so I apologize for that. I am fulfilling my role tonight to put things in front of you. So this aside, because there'll be more conversation about it, are there any other questions about the rest of the article? I'll put it back up on the screen so you can see it. Is there a comfort level if we strip that one out, which by the way, it may not stay here anyway. In fact, based on your comments, it probably shouldn't stay here. Because we don't normally put something of that magnitude into the one-time costs. If that's true, it's not going to do that. It's in here simply because we had to put it somewhere tonight. So if you take that out, is there any questions about the rest of it? Because those aren't I don't expect any of those to change the other ones. So.
I see a hand from Mary.
Yes, just quickly, Chris, given the third or fourth item down, the playground really maintenance rather than upgrades, I would be interested in just changing the verbiage there, because you're going to be talking about Beechwood upgrades, and I think it gets a little confusing.
Gotcha. I gotcha.
So
Call it Ferris Playground maintenance.
Repair.
just repair.
Right, repair. Yeah. All right. How's that?
I'd
Aaron.
suggest, unless anybody has any other individual questions about other individual articles, I think that we certainly don't want to vote on the field study item, and I don't think we should be voting on the collective bargaining agreements either. So we can either vote the rest of the slate, deferring on those two items, or defer the whole article. I personally tend to prefer the former because memories are fresh. But what does anybody else think?
Agree.
Excellent. And I see some thumbs up. So, can we have a motion, that the advisory committee recommend, Article 4, except for, in the manner it appears in the warrant, except for the items relating to collective bargaining agreements and field study, for approval by town meeting?
So moved.
Mike, and the second, Fran. All
Second.
right, Fran. All right. Then roll call vote. Mike Barclay,
Aye.
Fran Collins,
Aye.
Patrick Kennedy,
Aye.
Mark Maggi,
Aye.
Ellen Mar,
Aye.
Mary McGoldrick,
Aye.
Meg Wheeler,
Aye.
and Rob Hillman is an aye.
Rob,
Okay,
I just have a quick question for Chris Senior, or a request.
sure.
Do you think it would be possible on the warrant to number these items?
Yes, yes, we will. So we did that for capital. I apologize. We just didn't do that for this one. We'll do that.
Okay, thank you.
It started with just a few and it kept getting bigger, so. So the next one is capital, and that is numbered, and there are 7 of them. Capital.
Can I ask a preliminary question, Chris?
Sure.
Are the matters that we're looking at here, have they been approved by capital budget?
1, 2, 4, and 5 have been. So that's the electric vehicles, the police radios, the police interview cameras, and the public safety generator have all been voted to recommend. And Mike Dick is in the audience. They're still hearing the Osgood vestibule, which is stuck because it can't really be built until next year. And the HVAC upgrades is still a question of what the dollar. It's not a question of the project, finishing the project. It's what the dollar number is. And the Beechwood water main, I don't think there's any issue with that either. Just haven't voted it. It's a project that's already been approved. That just the bids came back too much and funded. So that's coming out of capital's water stabilization. So.
Okay, well, I interrupted you again, but why don't we bear those things in mind, because, and it's obviously up to the committee, not to me, but we may wish to vote on things that have been fully vetted by capital budget and then revisit the other ones after they've weighed in. But we'll get to that when we get to that. So why don't you walk us through what's here?
So one, we had talked about this last week, and Mark had asked a series of good questions about the value and the depreciation and all on these vehicles. This is just buying out the lease, which was already paid. We already paid by a grant. There's nothing else to lease. So the 42 weeks, though that said, we don't. They're used mostly around town, so they don't have a lot of miles on them. They've been well managed, and we think we get another 3 years out of them. So this is basically buying the lease out, which is already paid for, and keeping the 3 vehicles, which are used all the time by staff and by Elder Affairs. So they're Leafs, they're Nissan Leafs, fully electric Nissan Leafs. And capital recommended that by a vote of 3-0. The second is police radios. Chief Quigley went out and got a grant. This is the match. In order to replace $50,000 worth of radios, we're putting in 12, and the grant covers the other 38,000. So that's the reason this is here now in spring, is because the grant we just won. That's an important step. We have to replace those periodically. And I'm going to just do the ones that have been voted on for the moment. The police interview cameras, again, they need to be upgraded. There's an interview room. You got to record all the interviews. They just need to replace the camera system in it. And that's what that is. And then the public safety generator, there needs to be an upgrade to the generator there. It's just not big enough. It never got big enough. And after a lot of review, it's like, why live long? Let's just replace the thing. We can't have the power go down in the police and fire station. And the building, as Fran shakes his head, Fran knows better than all of us. He's probably watched it grow. It is like a Frankenstein building. It's been cobbled together again and again and again. Or I should say Frankenstein. It's been adapted and adopted. So there's flat roofs and pointy roofs and this and that. This will finally power all the building, and it'll make the building safe. So so Capital voted unanimously on 1, 2, 4, and 5. 3, 6, and 7 are still under review. That's the Osgood, the HVAC, and Beechwood. You're muted. Still muted, Rob.
Sorry. Ellen, your hand's been up, but that might just be leftover. There it goes. Questions, comments, observations about these matters?
What is the HVAC, the upgrade, where are they, is that general throughout the town, or is that?
No. So Fran, the main building never really had, the offices and the bathrooms never really had HVAC, and except for, I think, the front office. So this took care of the bathrooms and some of the other rooms in the building that never had HVAC in them.
Which building?
I'm sorry, the Public Works building. Where they on Elm. This is on Cedar, and it was funded, but they squeezed the number, and it wasn't enough to finish. They're the ones you put up on the wall, the individual units. I can't remember what they're called.
Split system.
Yes.
Exactly. There. So and it didn't. For whatever reason, the number didn't get approved at the number that was needed, and there's still some work to need. So they haven't been able to do the project without all the money. So they really like to get it done. They're not that complicated to do. They're simple and energy efficient, and the building wasn't designed with them. Unfortunately, this is not a full system, Fran. The building's too complicated for that. So, let me answer your question on that.
Yep, thank you.
Ellen? I'm sorry, Ellen, you're muted.
Sorry, Chris, do we still use the OneDrive for document storage?
Yep.
Okay, so all of the applications for these items would be on that drive?
Yep, and in fact, I should make sure that we should share them all with you. So, yep.
Anyone else? Okay, does anybody agree or disagree with the notion that perhaps we should vote on those things that have been vetted by capital budget and see what they send us next week? See some thumbs. Okay, Chris, can you give me the from column 2 project, there's 6 numbers there. Which numbers have been approved by capital budget?
1, 2, 4, and 5.
Okay, can I have a motion that I can
Okay.
whip it up, that the advisory committee recommend town meeting approval, that it approve Article 5, numbers 1, 2, 4, and 5 substantially in the form of the draft warrant dated October 19th.
So moved.
Mary, second.
Seconded.
Patrick, vote by roll call. Mike Barclay,
Aye.
Fran Collins,
Aye.
Patrick Kennedy,
Aye.
Mark Maggi,
Aye.
Ellen Mar,
Aye.
Mary McGoldrick,
Aye.
Meg Wheeler,
Aye.
and Rob Hillman is an aye. Next,
So CPC isn't ready yet, so you can just pass on 6 for now. They're meeting on Monday. Hopefully you'll see this next week. Article 7.
so those 3 projects and those amounts are the
So
proposals that are before them.
yeah, so the lacrosse wall is likely to be subsumed into that bigger conversation that we were just having about fields. The Beechwood playground improvements and the theater are definitely in there, and it's possible, depending on what happens with the other conversations, that some money might be sought from CPC on Monday to just complete those bathrooms, and because regardless of what happens at Milliken, the bathrooms and they don't have to be done. It's not it's been the white whale for us. And Michelle hasn't even been, we finally threw up our hands. So let's just get nice temporary bathrooms, and we couldn't get those. They're not even available. We had to wait a year to get the nice temporary bathrooms. So we're having a meeting, I think it's tomorrow, to talk internally about a way to get this built. So we actually have and it may require a little bit more money than the roughly 200,000 that's available. That said, it's got to get done.
Okay, we'll pick that up next week. So Article 7, Public Health Program Revolving Fund.
So yeah, so this is just it's to create we have revolving funds for a lot of things, and what's historically happened with vaccines is they just get added to they're just addressed as part of the Board of Health budget. But we've done more of them than we used to, both with flu and obviously COVID. So there's been the Board of Health said, hey, can we maybe break this out and treat this as a separate fund? And Don Pyatt actually, before he left, was complaining about the accounting for this, because we get reimbursed for various medical plans and all that, and it becomes a pain. So having this all in one little world, that doesn't have any impact on the actual, the general fund budget. We don't, the schools don't get a piece of this or anything like that. So it's to have it separate will ease the accounting, and I think also just allow the funding of it to work a little bit more smoothly. So, any questions? Jennifer can talk more if she wants to.
Is there any reason not to do this?
I don't have any, so.
Ellen?
So a revolving fund, just from my experience in the school committee, you can carry it over from year to year.
Yep.
But the way this reads, it's to coincide with the fiscal year. So what happens to the balance at the end?
They still roll. We still have to account for them on a fiscal year basis. You're right, Ellen. The money will just continue to roll, and you're allowed to keep doing that. Jennifer can talk more about the accounting.
Yeah, if you want me to jump in for a minute.
Sure.
The revolving funds, really what you're doing, an important aspect of the revolving funds is you're setting the expenditure limit, which can be changed if we see more revenue coming in and we need to expense. We're not going to expend money that revenue hasn't been posted yet, but it's also, capping the expenditure limit, which is also part of a revolving fund. So it keeps the revenues and expenses all together for this specific purpose. And it rolls over year to year, but every year an expenditure limit has to be approved.
These were a little differently in the schools, Ellen.
Yeah.
These are now bylaw funds, so you have to reset the spending limit every year. And quite frankly, the select board can change it at any given point in the year if they need to anyway. It's just, there's a formality of readopting these every year, the spending limits. So.
And where does the 30,000 come from?
That was a high upper end of what would normally flow through this. We usually only spend about 5,000 on vaccines every year. That would take into account if we start to do more. So that just, it made it so we wouldn't have to change it.
Okay.
It doesn't mean it's got to be 30,000 in there, by the way. It doesn't mean that at all. It just means that's the churn, max churn level fund.
Fran?
How much of the money is reimbursed by people? Aren't people paying for the vaccines? Don't you have to put it on your insurance?
So sometimes we get grants, Fran, from various places. Sometimes it's reimbursement from insurance companies. That's one of the things that makes it kind of a pain for accounting purposes. And often, the insurance stuff doesn't always match when we do things. I mean, it takes months to get reimbursed on some of this stuff. So in a revolving fund, it's kind of keep the accounting within that revolving fund. So Jennifer won't have to tie back, money from a prior year to a post.
So this gives us upfront money in anticipation of being refunded.
No, not necessarily that, but it does, because the town can loan, never mind, I don't want the accounting of this. So,
I mean, Basically what this fund is we're taking the revenue for the vaccines, the source of the fund, and we will not expend from that unless the money is actually in the account. It just is money coming in and money going out. So we're using the money from the vaccines to fund the vaccines, just keeping it simple
Okay. All right,
and
thank you.
setting an expenditure limit.
Okay. Anything else? Hearing none, I think we can vote on Article 7, creation of a revolving fund. Shall the advisory committee recommend to town meeting that it approve Article 7 substantially in the form in the draft warrant dated October 19, 2022?
So moved.
Patrick,
Second,
Mary. Roll call vote. Mike Barclay,
Aye.
Fran Collins.
Aye.
Patrick Kennedy,
Aye.
Mark Maggi,
Aye.
Ellen Mar,
Aye.
Mary McGoldrick,
aye.
Meg Wheeler,
Aye.
and Rob Hillman. I am an aye. Okay. Article 8, transfer of funds received from the National Opioid Settlement.
So there was a big, I'm sure everyone saw that there was a big settlement on opioids. The Master Attorney General was in it. As a result, Cohasset's getting money every year for about the next 15 or 20 years. The first installment's about 30-something thousand, low 30s, 33 or $34,000. And pursuant to the terms of the settlement, we have to spend it in a dedicated area. It would be great if we can, again, put that into a fund. But at this point, there isn't state enabling statute to do that. Settlements, well, this is a settlement, would normally go right into the general fund. We don't want to do that because it needs to be spent specifically in a fairly limited world of things. It's going to primarily be spent, if not under the direction of Safe Harbor Cohasset anyway. That said, when we get the money, in order to spend it, we have to appropriate it. This is the best method, we think, for the time being, though it's possible this is not even technically allowed by state law either. So we're working with council to figure it out. Worst case scenarios is that we have to wait till the spring and the money will just sit there until the spring because we can't spend it until we have a method to spend it. So this is, we think, the right answer for now, although we'll see if, and council has said that it's, seems to think it's okay. And we're going to see what the state, if the state takes any action to clarify this. I doubt, I'm afraid the legislature will, but maybe the administrative agencies might be able to do something between now.
Okay. Questions, comments? No. Hearing none. Then a vote. So somebody make a motion, shall the advisory committee recommend to town meeting that it approve Article 8 in substantially the form in the draft warrant dated October 19, 2022.
So move.
Fran, second.
Second.
Patrick. Roll call vote, Mike Barclay,
Aye.
Fran Collins.
Aye.
Mark Maggi,
Aye.
Patrick Kennedy,
Aye.
Ellen Mar,
Aye.
Mary McGoldrick,
Aye.
Meg Wheeler,
Aye.
and Rob Hillman. I am an aye. Approved. Okay. I love this article. I think this is great fun. I want to see what the easement reads like when it's done, because it's going to involve a ladder. But Chris, why don't you go ahead and explain it?
So back in the 1860s, the town bought a clock. And at the time, it was still in the process of building town hall. And town hall was not designed with the clock tower. So the town had been based in the church. And so the clock went into the church. And the clock has been in the church since the 1860s. And it's been maintained in a variety of ways. Unfortunately, it's kind of fallen on hard times. It hasn't really worked in a while. We need to get it fixed. So as we went through the process with our new council to, last year, it was approved. There was a CPC funded it. And we've got it, before we went out to bid, our council said, well, where's the easement for access? we looked and we couldn't find one. So the church is more than willing to grant us an easement because we've been going in and out of there for 160 years. So we just have to formalize it. It's one of those things that if something exists, it's lost to history. So we need to formally have an easement. So as Rob said, we can climb the ladder, get into the clock and fix it and make it work again. So that's what this will, the language of this might change. I'm still waiting for council, and the easement itself will look different than this.
We don't want to consider coming to it from above via helicopter?
We could try that, Mark. We could try. We could maybe we could drop and like hang, like the special forces do. You can hang from the. Right? And what the real challenge is that it's I have not been in there, but apparently you have to be kind of small to get in and out of that. So I was recommending that Clark, that Clark, I'm sorry, that Carl Sestito become our new clock manager, but he laughed and he wouldn't do it. So I thought it would be a great job for him. So that said, we have a bit out, and we do need to formalize the easement so that we can access it.
Fran?
Just as some more piece of history, the last time we overhauled the clock was probably back around 1970, I think. And I rigged the clock down out of the tower. I rigged it down, put it in my truck, took it over to the Votech school, and they rebushed it and overhauled it, came back in spiffy condition. And I rigged it back up put it back in place. And Noel Ripley, who was the head clockologist at that point, got it going again, and there it's at. So we never worried too much about easements, and I just made sure we had good rigging so it didn't fall. And that's how it was done that time. And it is pretty tight up there.
Well, if we have to take it out again, Fran, we know where to call. So.
Yeah.
I remember the first time I sort of saw a town report, and there was an office called Keeper of the Town Clock. There's also something called the Measure of Wood and Bark and a Fence Viewer. Jobs to which I aspire. But any other comments, questions about the an easement that goes up a ladder? What fun. Okay. We have a motion. Shall the advisory committee recommend that town meeting that it approve Article 9 in substantially the form in draft warrant dated October 19, 2022.
So moved.
Patrick,
Second,
Mary, roll call vote. Mike Barclay,
Aye.
Fran Collins,
Aye.
Patrick Kennedy,
Aye.
Mark Maggi,
Aye.
Ellen Mar,
Aye.
Mary McGoldrick,
aye.
Meg Wheeler,
Aye.
and Rob Hillman is an aye. Approved. Article 10.
Okay, so I won't put this up on the screen. You all have it. So this we just finally got the language. So it's a little late, and I always get a little skittish when I do a special time meeting with language changes. So we'll see how this shakes out. You have your expert Patrick Kennedy's going to look at this, I guess, and get back to you.
Yeah, I hadn't seen the language of it yet. I got to get in touch with Chris McFarland is still the chair.
Correct.
So I'll call Chris. I'll get in touch with Chris. I suggest we defer this until our next meeting.
I think we should too. So unless anybody has any further questions, we'll defer on Article 11 and no pun intended, but dive into that when we get there.
10.
Good. All right. Article 11, public safety communication towers. We talked about this a little bit at our last meeting. Chris?
Yeah, so this is, so we've been looking at, and I think I mentioned before, we've actually put an emergency communication device down at Rocky Beach, which has been great. It hasn't had to be used yet, but it's great that it's there. That said, the real problem, the substantial problem is that whole end of town, that whole northeast corner of town has horrible cell service. And that's even apart from emergencies. So, and it causes some problems. So the fact that we have no towers on the ocean side, normally if you're inland, you get 360 coverage, more or less, unless you're in the mountains or weird valleys. So it amounts to a valley on the ocean. So we've been looking to try to find a location. There is one in Wheelwright Park. We've discussed that, I think, a couple of times. It's in the general but not exact vicinity of the old radar tower. about it. I think, well, the article references 8.7 acres. We're not going to dedicate 8.7 acres. I think it's an acre or less that will need to be dedicated as this, for this. And just to allow work to be done and this to be put up. This article authorizes the steps to go to the state to allow this little piece of Wheelwright Park, not the whole thing, just a little piece of it that has to be more tightly defined, a little map, to be carved out for non-park purposes. And there's still work to be done. It'll have to go to annual town meeting for approval for, leasing a site to a, we'll have to go through a vending process, procurement process to get a vendor to build it and to maintain it, because we don't really want to build and maintain it. So there'll be a time frame, which will be great. And it'll also most importantly, improve coverage in an area of town. And I know that I know that Patrick lives it every day. That area is just not, it's not a good area. And this was selected in collaboration with the cellular companies. So it should have a substantial, should this get built, it should have a substantial improvement to the coverage in that area.
Questions, Fran?
What's the range of these towers? What's the geographical range of these towers? I'm just thinking that the top of Crocker Lane up there on top of Situate Hill, that's one of the highest points in town. Would that have appropriate range? I don't know.
What I've learned, the little bit that I can talk fluently about this, is that the more the technology increases, the less the signal travels. I know that sounds crazy, but it's what happens. So 5G travels less than 4G, travels less than 3G. So, and they also become impeded. So the Situate Hill is very high, but it's also further away.
Yeah.
The higher services also are more easily impeded by leaves and trees and vegetation, which is why service gets better in the winter up there. Again, I don't know if this will be a panacea and fix everything, but it'll fix a lot of it. There's probably going to be requests from the companies as they go to 5G, and whatever the successor to 5G will be, they're probably going to be looking to add little repeaters on poles from time to time. That said, as anyone who drives there knows, there are no poles on that part of Jerusalem Road anyway. So you couldn't put the repeaters if you wanted to, unless you put them in boxes on the ground. I don't know how that would be. So
well, I think that answers the question, Chris. I didn't realize what the range of it is. I mean, I can recall years ago going to sea, we'd be heading out across the Atlantic Ocean and you'd be coming by Miami and you're going to go over to the Bahamas and head out. You could see Miami and you couldn't get any reception. Now, people that had somebody else's, they would get going through, but Verizon, you could never get any reception. It was very frustrating when you actually see the land and you can't make any connection.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, also, once you get the structure up, the companies can add small cells, which will help improve the, as usage and density becomes greater, it's an easier add-on once the structure's in place.
Yeah, exactly. All right.
Did I see any other hands? I'm a little concerned about approving this without a number of acres in the draft. When does that number go in?
I can have a buttoned up one for you for next week.
Does anybody else have any thoughts? I mean, we could defer, or we can vote it on the theory that it'll be the right number of acres. No one's going to come in and say something stupid like, 62. Fran?
Well, obviously they have to have access to get into wherever the tower is going to be. So that's going to be, whether that's going to be an easement or whatever, but I can't imagine the footprint for the tower wouldn't be much bigger than, if it was a quarter of an acre, would be a lot. Say 10,000 square feet.
But you have to have a zone around it in case it falls, right? So, yeah. So that's why it has to be put in a safe place. So, I mean,
and there's just nothing down there, and nobody goes there because it's all overgrown and undergrown with, it's no fun at all to try and hike through. So, all right, I'm prepared to do a motion if the committee is. So somebody want to shall the Advisory Committee recommend to town meeting that it approve Article 11, substantially in the form in the draft warrant dated October 19, 2022.
Motion to approve.
Mark, second.
Second,
Mike, okay. Roll call vote. Mike Barclay,
aye.
Fran Collins.
Aye.
Patrick Kennedy,
Aye.
Mark Maggi,
Aye.
Ellen Mar,
Aye.
Mary McGoldrick,
Aye.
Meg Wheeler,
Aye.
and Rob Hillman. I am an aye as well. Approved. Article 12, Civil Service.
So as part of the, I mean, if you, this is part of the negotiated settlement with the police union. That said, they have agreed to support the removal of the department from civil service as part of the contract settlement. I can talk more about what that entailed when we meet. If you, that said, this is the actual mechanism for doing it. So you have to get out of civil service the same way you got in, and back in the 20s, and we have the data, I don't have it off the top of my head. Town meeting voted to bring the Cohasset Police into the civil service system. So to get out of it, there has to be a vote of town meeting, and then we petition the legislature, and then they eventually vote it out. And then in the interim, we'd set up our own system. That's how it will work. We've already had conversations about how to do that. We have several neighbors who are already out or never gotten in the first place. So the hope is to have some collaboration with some of our neighbors on that, so we can share resources. And then again, the biggest differences will be that we'll be able to recruit more broadly, and to also promote on not just a written test, but assessments and skills and things that civil service doesn't do a very good job of assessing. So, which is, I think, the prime reason that the department members are okay with it. Now, as I say all that, all the existing members, every single one of them retains their civil service until they leave or they retire. So this has no impact on current members of the department, only future ones. So future hires and future promotion opportunities.
Would we prefer to discuss this further in connection with the executive session on the collective bargaining agreements, or to just approve this as a standalone? Ellen?
I'd like to discuss it in more detail in executive session, please.
Okay,
Would you like to have Chief Quigley in that one, or are you comfortable with just me? You don't have to tell me now.
Oh, if you're asking me, I'm comfortable with just.
Okay, all right.
If we're gonna have a broader conversation
Yeah.
about all of the agreements, it might not be appropriate to have them there.
I'd like to know what the pros and cons are.
Well, the pros are that, well, we talk about, if we're gonna talk about next, if you're not gonna vote on it now, I might as well hold it up. So the pros, Fran, is that civil service was designed a long time ago, and it hasn't really kept with the times. And I will give you one very important example. We wanted to have a female police officer. It's the 21st century, and we had to justify why we needed a female police officer. And so the lists are all scored. They're not gender, and it wasn't about finding someone who wasn't skilled. We found an excellent officer. Getting to her was incredibly difficult, and you need a woman on the force, if for nothing else, than to deal with domestic violence victims and others, where that presence is absolutely required. And civil service actually makes you go through hoops to do that. And unfortunately, the other reality is that in this day and age, if you don't, the civil service testing system is very outdated. It just is. If we want to recruit Cohasset, folks from Cohasset.
pardon me, Chris, I have to step away for a second. We're going to defer on this, so
Okay.
if Mary
That's
wants to move us on to the next.
Do you want to talk to me offline, Fran?
Yeah,
Stop by.
Yeah, I mean, we have had female police officers. I can think of about 4 or 5.
So getting the last one's very difficult, but I want to belabor this. So
Okay,
we're gonna hold this for next week.
Yep.
Article 13, Mary, is that the next one?
Yep.
So this is just extensions of existing contracts on water department property already. So there are, it's on the Turkey Hill tank, I think. Is that the one behind the schools, right? Is it Situate Hill, the one up on by Avalon? I want that one. I believe there's towers on both. So this would just allow for extensions of the existing agreements. The money goes right to the water department. It helps their operations. And it obviously provides great coverage for large chunks of the town, but unfortunately, not all. And Tammany has approved it.
Rob, did you hear that?
I did not. What's the short of it?
The Article 13
Oh.
just reauthorizes authorize the water department to renew existing leases for.
Yeah, I did hear
for
that.
fixed-
Okay, Mike, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just see that it refers to Verizon and AT&T. Does it include T-Mobile too? And is this for all the carriers? I'm just curious more than anything.
Yeah, it's for anyone that's already there. I don't know if T-Mobile's there or not. So it should be clear that it's for every carrier that currently, these are just renewals. They're not new. There's been no proposals to add new. I know that AT&T and Verizon up there. I don't know if T-Mobile's up there or not.
Okay, I think it just improves coverage when you add, you've got 3 major carriers now in this country, and I think it just improves coverage when all of them are involved in something like this. But anyway, so.
And I'll check. There's no effort to exclude anybody. So if they want to get up there, I don't think it's an issue.
Any other questions? Okay, get a motion, shall the advisory committee recommend to town meeting that it approve Article 13 in substantially the form it appears in the draft warrant dated October 19, 2022.
So move.
Fran, second.
Second,
Patrick,
Mike got there first. Roll call vote, Mike Barclay,
aye.
Fran Collins,
Aye.
Patrick Kennedy,
aye.
Mark Maggi,
Aye.
Ellen Mar,
Aye.
Mary McGoldrick,
Aye.
Meg Wheeler,
Aye.
and Rob Hillman is an aye. So the next article is this King Street Citizens Petition for Sidewalks. Chris and I discussed this earlier, and apparently the proponents see this as a sense of the meeting vote. We had one of those at the last but one town meeting, and the decision we made as an advisory committee is that if someone's asking for the sense of town meeting, it's not really our place to advise town meeting on what its own sense is. So what we decided to do in that case was to abstain as a committee, but any of us individually could stand up and address it. I don't know, maybe that's too clever by half, but I think it's probably a good practice. So the first thing I'd say is, should we, does the committee want to go on that, or would we prefer to discuss it substantively and make a recommendation to town meeting? Hearing none. Patrick, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I should have put my hand up. So I did it physically. I don't know much about this article. It doesn't say very much. It doesn't have a dollar limit. It doesn't, who knows what the cost of an engineering study for that length of roadway with all the wetlands. I think it'd be impossible to know the cost of putting in sidewalks all the way. I don't know how many miles that is, 2.5 miles. How many, whether there would be any takings of properties necessary. I don't know. It just seems like it's a big number to me, even though a number is not stated. And the minute you have these types of citizens petitions, every other neighborhood that envisions a possible sidewalk along their street, it's going to open up the floodgates, I'm afraid. So I'd be sort of inclined to think about taking a position on this, if others are so inclined.
I'm agnostic about it, so other people have opinions?
Just to clarify, if I may, Rob, so I did talk to the proponents and the other day, and I'm going to circle back. And they did say to me, when I first saw this, I'm like, oh, they're looking for money, but they said they're not looking for money. So it's just like the baseball light one sense of the meeting, right?
That's the one.
Yeah, the baseball lights. So, which again was not historic practice of town meeting at the time I've been here, but it's becoming one apparently by some. And the impression I get from them is they just want to raise the safety issue of their street so that people are paying attention to it. And the select board authorized us to put those speeding and the speed cams which you see on Forest and scattered all through Hingham that flat and Sawyer that flash your speed, tell you to slow down. We're going to put those on King Street anyway. Again, it's just a procedural thing. So the motion that will end up being drafted will clearly state that this is not, look, they're not seeking any money. I'm not taking a position.
I
Yeah.
mean, the article says
before-
there's a request for the town to appropriate funds.
I know.
How could they?
I know, Patrick, and I asked them, they said, well, that's what, and we, by the way, when they met with council, and I was part of the conversation, as we open up, to council, we bring council in for citizens to talk about how they might structure a petition if they want to do one. And this was discussed as part of the article. That said, it was if they really want, I think it was when I read it at face value, I see the same thing you do, Patrick. I was told by the people supporting it that they're not looking for money right now. They're just looking for a voice of support for the safety of their neighborhood. That said, the motion is what's going to prove this out. So I'm going to be talking with them in council in the weeks ahead to get that finalized. But I'm telling you what I was told literally face to face the other night. So.
Well, Mary's next, but if I could exercise my prerogative, I'm not sure that we want to, as a matter of process, encourage the use of town meeting for purposes other than voting on actual warrant articles to do actual things. Making it a polling device is just a bad use of town meeting time. But that's just my editorial comment. Mary, then Fran?
I agree with that. I think it's vague. I don't think it's the right forum necessarily to have that discussion. And I feel like it's dangerous to issue an opinion on something that doesn't have defined parameters.
Fran?
Yeah, I agree with that. The other thing, this sounds like a peripheral thing, but we have sidewalks in the town now. And we have people that jog and walk and run, and they insist on running on the street, and they don't use the sidewalks. Maybe we should, if we're going to put in new sidewalks, you should make it a rule that they must be used for pedestrians. Anyway, that was just my comment. Sour grapes.
I think maybe we have another meeting next week. Maybe we defer to see if there's any changes on this and talk about either abstaining or taking a position that, depending on the vote of the committee, obviously, maybe we craft a response that we don't recommend it, just don't recommend it because of all the defects that people have pointed out. Both its sort of procedural inappropriateness and its vagueness and other things. I mean, people on the committee may choose to stand up and say that they think that sidewalks on King Street are a great idea. It's just not, just not this. This is the wrong way to do it. So if it's all the same to the committee, can we just defer this one, or would people prefer to take a position, take a vote?
I defer.
I'd say
Okay.
defer.
Then we'll defer this, and that gets us to Article 15. And I think the plan for that is to defer it as well, because I guess there's a proponent who may want to present us with some written or in-person background and or some potential changes to the petition. And I think it probably requires a fair amount of study beforehand. I've seen some documents associated with it that, I've said this before, and I'm gonna, I want to really talk to Chris, and I talked to Chris about sending a message when people walk into town hall and say, I've got a citizen's petition, I'd like this to be on the warrant, that somebody should tell them, oh, by the way, there's this committee that advises, and perhaps you should contact them and see if you can, get some of their time so that they can advise in connection with your citizen's petition. You know, I realize I feel like, you know, we won't be ignored, but, but, you know, I'm not inclined to take favorable positions on anything, no matter what its merits. People won't bother to come and ask for it. But that's just me. But I do think that somebody is going to come and talk to us, and there may be some development. So I was going to recommend deferring our conversation on this article as well. Is everybody good with that?
I agree.
Okay, good. All right. So that gets us through the warrant. I jotted down what we've done. I'm sure Ellen has too, but that's quite a bit done and really kind of sharpens the areas of inquiry for our next meeting. The other matters on our agenda are liaison assignments, which is essentially, has anyone anything to report from the committees with which they liaise that we haven't discussed already? Mary?
Just a little update on the school committee did have a meeting of the Budget and Resources Subcommittee, but we didn't get a heads up on that. And I'm still waiting for either minutes, or a recording on those. So I have pinged the chair of the school committee, Lance Dial. I just haven't heard back yet. Tonight in going over the budget so we can watch the recording tomorrow, Ellen, that'll be fun. And then there was a very well-attended zoning meeting on, what was that, Monday night, Tuesday night, Chris? Really well done, by the way, and really well attended, and that was exciting, just about some of the zoning bylaw issues they're proposing over the next, working through, they have a working group that they're working through over the next couple months. That will be brought to Springtown meeting, as I understand.
I think their goal is to get something at Springtown meeting. So.
Yeah. It was
Fran?
exciting to see
Oh, sorry.
50 people in the room and more people on Zoom. That was nice.
Good. Fran?
Alternative Energy, they just announced that we have saved in the 5 years since we put the solar panel field up at the dump, $300,000, which is a pretty nice piece of change. And
Awesome.
they've got a number of other issues that they're working very hard on. I haven't been to their most recent meeting, so I'll have a better report next time we come around. And I think that's I think they're really putting an awful lot of time and effort in doing some good work.
Mike?
Yeah, I have a meeting with Chief Quigley on Friday to talk about the operating and capital budgets from the police, and then the following Friday with Chief Dockery for the same topics. So I'll have more on that in the next couple meetings.
Okay. All right. And I do not think, Patrick, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we have any minutes just now.
No, there are two outstanding minutes, October 5 and August 31st.
Okay. And then,
Strive to get those done.
thank you. Ellen, did I see your hand up?
Yeah, I was just jumping ahead to the next agenda item, sorry.
Topics not reasonably anticipated?
I just have a question about an update on our budget message that, you know, we met about not October 5th, but August 31st, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And you and Mary were going to craft something. Has that been?
Yeah, that was, God, I'm sorry. I should have copied it back to everybody on the committee as well. That got sent to the select board after sitting in my outbox for a little while that I didn't know. Patrick reminded me that it needed to be sent, and I sent it, and it got to them before the select board's budget message was finalized. So they had the benefit of our input, but I will circulate that. And I also will add meeting planning to our agenda as a standing item. And apart from that, is there any other unanticipated issues? Good. Okay, then unless there's anything else, we'll meet a week from tonight. Hopefully, without a meeting that's overly long, we should be able to get through what remains on the on the warrant or defer things that can't be, that aren't ready to go. And, Chris, do I see you?
So I just want to know how you want to handle the collective bargaining. Do you want to start
We'll
at 7 and
I
do an
prefer to-
executive session?
And would,
Do you want to do it at the beginning or the end of your meeting?
ordinarily, I do them at the beginning if we have other people coming in, like council. And maybe we should do that anyhow. We'll open with executive session, we'll come out of executive session and then do our meeting. Unless anybody has a different conception of how that ought to go. Yeah, I'll do executive session at 7, general session at 7:40. And then we should be able to get through everything else by, 8:30, 9 o'clock. Is that all right with everybody? Good. Okay.
I'll work to get materials on all the contracts to you in advance. I know that we're working with Jennifer to cost them out and do spreadsheets. And we'll also just do summaries of the changes and then give you copies of that. We'll try to get to you enough in advance so you can chew on them a little in advance before the meeting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's part of the bylaw with certain contracts that they have to be to this committee 30 days prior to the meeting in their final form. It sounds like we'll be able to do that, but
Well, is this executive session on the warrant item that is a collective bargaining piece? Or is it on the whole, is it on both? Like our review of collective bargaining agreements plus the warrant article?
I conceive it as a update on collective bargaining, including the warrant the pieces of the warrant article that are appropriate for executive session.
Okay,
And we'll cabin those issues into executive session and then do what ought to be done in public.
how is town meeting gonna be able to vote on that $150,000 item without knowing the ins and outs of the contract issues that are in the collective bargaining non-public session, executive session?
Well, they're gonna have been all ratified at that point. But remember, the select board approves them anyway. This town meeting only funds things. They don't. So if people have questions, I guess they can ask. I am not planned on, in my 9 years, we've never actually presented a contract to town, only funded them. So that said, the civil service question is gonna be literally on the warrant. So that's different than normal. So.
And we can talk about the negotiation and other things that are not public in executive session, but the public has the information regarding this is the contract. And now these are agreed contracts. They're not the result of a JLMC order.
Correct. They're all gonna be negotiated.
Okay.
settlements.
Have
So
they
they
been
don't-
voted? Have they been
No,
voted?
no, they're going to select board next Tuesday. So they're
No,
gonna-
they've been voted by the union members.
Yeah, so I believe they're all or almost all ready for that.
Okay.
So I think my hope is that when we get to select board next Tuesday, we're buttoned up on all that. Either way, the terms are done. It's for sure. And I know that several votes have taken place for sure.
Okay.
All right, we'll go review that and make sure that we do it by the book. All right, anything else? That's time for that one last motion. Does anybody want to move to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Everybody wants to move to adjourn.
I goes to
Trick-
who?
Seconded by Mary, roll call vote, Mike Barclay,
Aye.
Fran Collins.
Aye.
Patrick Kennedy,
Aye.
Mark Maggi,
Aye.
Ellen Mar,
Aye.
Mary McGoldrick,
I
Meg Wheeler.
Aye.
We stand adjourned. I'll see you, pretty good, 15 minutes over. And we'll make sure that we have all these issues teed up for the next meeting. Thanks, Chris. Thanks for all the information and Jennifer. And we'll talk between now and the next meeting.
Thank you.
Rob.
Good.
Thank you.
Very good. Have a good
Have a
night.
good night.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Bye.